An entrepreneur to survive and thrive needs to sell. But what if you hate to sell? Well, Dr. Nadia Brown is going to give you ways to increase your salesperson's courage to sell. You want to turn your self-doubt about sales into confidence and get more leads? Well, today we have a very special person that is an expert in sales and sales strategy, Nadia Brown. Nadia, welcome to the Excellent Executive Coaching Podcast.
Thank you, Katrina. So glad to be here.
Yes, I'm sorry. I should have said Dr. Nadia Brown.
It's fine. Dr. Katrina, right?
Right. After all, we have to amortize our PhDs, right?
Right.
So tell us, Nadia, how do you turn self-doubt into confidence?
Oh, my goodness. Well, one of the ways is practice. And I know a lot of people don't like to hear that, but, imperfect practice really helps you to get confident. And one of the ways, though, because it's like, okay, Nadia, you telling me to practice, but I really don't want to do this. After all, we're talking about sales. So one of the things that I have clients do is to take a step back and actually think through how they would want the conversation to go. And then also to think through like what questions you want to ask, the information that you really need to glean, and then figure out ways to have more of those practice conversations. Because in this instance, practice really does help you develop a level of not only proficiency, but also comfort.
Okay, so basically really do a thinking process even before you're trying to sell anything. That is, try to say, okay, what do I want? What do I need like information? Then practice it and then go for the sell.
Yeah, because a lot of times the reason why we don't like sales is because many times we've experienced negative sales, experiences as a buyer. And you walk away from that like, oh my gosh, I would never want to be that person. And then we find ourselves as business owners where we're required in many cases to have sales conversations in order to grow our business. And you're like, uh-oh, now what do I do? And so part of the process is really shifting and even unlearning some of those negative experiences that you had with sales, or even maybe some negative habits. You're like, that really doesn't feel in alignment. And then also finding the way you do sales. Like for me, I just had to figure out like, how does Nadia sell best? Like what makes me show up confidently? What allows me to show up truly 100% as myself and coming from a place of service? And in that, it was really, asking questions, giving myself the time to have a sales conversation. So I remember when I started my business many years ago, and at the time, it felt like all the rage was being able to have these quick close conversations, like 18, 20 minutes, like they really had a time limit. And I just went into a sales conversation with not only fear and trepidation, but also this massive amount of pressure to close a sale in 18 minutes. And when I gave myself permission to have a longer sales conversation, to really allow myself and that person to be able to ask questions, to answer questions, to really just, get to know one another, to understand how I can best serve them, then I started to see that shift in my results, but also in my confidence.
I find that a lot of my students, they lack confidence to do good sales. So would you address that in any other way?
Yes. So one of the things that I would advise is first to sit down and this is something I often ask in the beginning of trainings is what's coming up for you, right? Like you say, they lack the confidence. Then the bigger question is why? And really taking time, I can be totally old school with this one is, grab a piece of paper or a journal if you're a journaler and write it out. Like what's really coming up for you? A lot of times it's fear of rejection. A lot of times, we feel like we have to get it just right and it has to be perfect. And it's like, no, take a moment to look at all of those things, give voice to it, and then you can address those things in your sales conversations. And so when you go into a sales conversation, you want to go into that, as I like to describe, as an investigative reporter. So you put on your questioning hat to really get to understand and know a person, but to also go into a sales conversation with the idea that, one, it's a conversation. Two, from a power standpoint, I'm going into this conversation as an equal, because a lot of times we give all of the power to the other person, to the buyer, or, our prospective client in this instance. And we come into the conversation with that lack of confidence, with that fear. But in all honesty, you're going into this conversation to see if this person truly is a good fit. So there are things that you need to walk away with, and not just the sale. The sale is nice, but there are other things. Is this person truly in alignment? Are they willing to do the work? Especially if I'm a coach, like, are they going to be fun to work with? Are they going to do the things they need to get the results? And so what are the questions that you need to ask in order to walk away with knowing for sure if it's a good fit, and also reserving the right for you to say no? So now it's not just the buyer that might say no, but you as the seller may also say, you know what, Katrina, I don't think we're a good fit to work together, or to work together in this way. And you may have a self-paced course or some other option that they can, take advantage of. Or it may be, you know what, I have a great colleague that I would like to connect you with. And I think when you take all the pressure off of you of just having to get a sale in that initial conversation, but also giving yourself permission to possibly say no, it really starts to shift a lot of the dynamics and how you show up to those conversations.
Yes. So if you're afraid of being rejected, for example, so you give concrete tips to counter that. First, see it as a conversation, being an investigator reporter, seeing yourself as equal as that person, giving yourself the right to say no, this will not be a truly good fit. And even if you want to work with the person, but they say no, and maybe they found out that they're not a good fit for you earlier than you did. Who knows?
Right. And then, I would add to that list, no today doesn't mean no forever. And so we have to go into that conversation also knowing what happens if, right? So if I go into this conversation and I know that if Katrina doesn't say yes today, for whatever reason, that I want to continue that relationship because maybe she just needs more time. Maybe the finances just truly aren't right yet. And so, what are the ways that you continue to nurture, to build on that relationship? Because in my experience, I've seen when it's a good fit and the timing is just off, when that person is ready, they do come back. And then when they're ready, they're like, all right, I'm ready. Like, we don't even need to talk about it. Just tell me where I need to sign up. And so also keep that in mind. Like, no today doesn't always mean no forever.
That's a very good point. You might have covered this, but what would you say is the number one secret to relationship-driven sales?
Focus on the relationship. And so in my experience, I've heard people talk about relationship-based sales. But when you actually go through the process, you're like, I don't know if there's a lot of focus on the relationship. And so there are a couple different ways that I advise people to do this. Really think about, how do you want your prospects to feel as they're going through that client journey, right? Like, as they get to know you, as they have maybe sales conversations with you, what does that follow-up process look like? And really mapping that out, but then also truly honoring the relationship. And part of that is honoring people's buying process. And so not everyone will have a one-time conversation, and in that conversation saying, yes, I'm ready. They may truly need time to sleep on it. And I've seen where people have, dismissed that, been very dismissive. And they're like, oh, that person isn't serious. That's an objection that you have to overcome. And don't let them off the phone until you get there. Like, all kinds of crazy stuff, right? And it's like, but what if that person is truly telling you the truth? Like, my husband is one of those folks that he needs to sleep on it. Once he's in, he's completely in. He's a loyal client, but he's not going to necessarily jump on a call and make a yes. And when you honor that buying process, man, you can have a client for life, right? And so I think part of that is really honoring it and truly respecting and showing respect for the other person and their process as well.
Yes, I like that you honor the respect. I'm not an impulsive buyer either, except for maybe a cake, but otherwise. But respecting their process, absolutely. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, let's say you already answered it to some degree, is the fear of selling. How do you help salespeople find out what is the underlying issue of their fear?
Yeah, so we start to really do some digging, right? Like really start to think about what are some of the things that come up for you, paying attention to your triggers, if you will. One of the resources we have is our Courage Diary, and in it is basically a post-sales call debrief, right? And so there's some questions, some different prompts. And one of the questions is, what emotions came up for you during the sales conversation? And giving voice to those so that you can really do some digging, like, why do I feel this way? What experience happened maybe in my past that is helping to influence these feelings? And so, for example, I found that one of my triggers during a sales conversation was if someone said, I can't afford this. I'm not 100% sure why. Part of it was, my judgment around, well, we can reframe that to how can you afford it, right? And so, all my stuff that was coming is showing up to this conversation. And through this process, I realized that when I would encounter that phrase, I would begin to emotionally kind of check out of the conversation. So while I'm still somewhat there, emotionally, I'm starting to kind of back out because my wall is going up. I'm telling myself all these juicy stories in my mind about what that person really meant by that, etc. And I started to pay attention to that and encourage myself to check all my baggage at the door, if you will, and to just stay in the conversation, to not check out. And there was this one time I was in a sales conversation. A woman said, I don't think I can afford this. And at the time, Katrina, we're talking about $15,000, $20,000 investment. So, it is totally realistic that wasn't necessarily in her budget, right? And we're not talking about cake or a pair of shoes. And I was just like, oh, okay. But she still had questions, right? Like that was a phrase that she said in the course of our conversation, but she didn't end the conversation. It wasn't like, I can't afford that. I'm leaving the conversation. Like she was still asking questions. And I was just like, I'm just going to continue to answer her questions, stay focused and present for this conversation and not check out. And as we continue to talk about it, without me prompting or driving or leading her to that conclusion, she was like, you know what? I could move some money from another account. Like she's just thinking and talking and processing this out loud. And I'm just sitting there like, doing my own internal conversation, like just stay focused, Nadia, just stay focused, Nadia. And ultimately she decided that not only she could afford it, but that she was going to pay in full. And it was a $20,000 decision. And it was a big lesson to me, like, Nadia, these are your own stories. This is your own stuff. But again, it doesn't always come right away, right? Like we just have to give ourselves permission to have those conversations, to pay attention, to really, have those moments where we debrief, like, and not only from a place of what could I have done differently because I had to get the sale, but also, like, how was I feeling today? And where is this really coming from? And, what can I do to really shift that so I can remain present in that moment and not project my stuff onto the person that I'm having a conversation with?
You made an important point to not project your personal triggers and issues onto the other person to interpret what they're going through, really.
Yep.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you have 5 ways to increase your sales courage in the moment. Can you walk us through that?
So one way is to go into a conversation prepared. So a lot of times when we go back to fear, it's the fear of the unknown. What happens if? Like, I don't know about you, but I am a big what if girl. And it's like, what if this happens? And so give yourself permission to have that. What if? And how can you address some of those what ifs before they become a what if. So for example, when you're having sales conversations, you've all heard this overcome objection. And we don't have time for Nadia's soapbox, but I will say this, that when you go into a conversation and you are prepared to address people's concerns, not so much their objections, and answer their questions, and you know what the answers are, that increases your confidence. So for example, if someone is just like, well, I'm just not really sure if I have the time. And you're like, okay, well, and then you may have another question. Well, like, how can you make the time? Or what else may be going on where that could be a concern? So basically, prepare before you go into the conversation is one way to overcome those fears and those concerns. The second way is, and this one is a little bit harder sometimes just because of what's been going on in the world over the past couple of years. But before, like a lot of our conversations were all on Zoom, when you're on the phone, stand up. So we think quicker on our feet when we're actually standing up. And so being able to move around and kind of give that energy someplace else to go. And it's okay to be nervous, right? Like we all get nervous. You're trying something new when you're learning a new skill in some cases. And so if you can have a sales call over the phone whenever you can, then being able to give yourself permission to get up. Now, for me, it's a little bit harder. I still do it. I'll stand up. I may not move around a lot because I'm a big note taker. So I like to write things down, which leads me into number 3 is write things down. So when you ask a question, write those things down and then repeat back to them what they said as part of the natural course of a conversation. So really treat it like a conversation. And so it also lets that person know that you're listening to them and increases their comfort. Like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know how many people have said to me, like, thank you so much for just listening. Whether I got the sale or not, they were just grateful that they were able to have a conversation and really learn more about whatever that issue was. And that they had an opportunity where someone actually listened to what they had to say and were able to help them kind of process wherever they were in that process. It doesn't mean that you coach them through that. So it's not giving a free coaching during your sales conversations, but it is creating the space for people to be able to think. And you may ask those probing questions so that they can help come to their own conclusion of where they are and how they need to best proceed with whatever that issue is that you're providing a solution to.
So it's also a coaching competency to reformulate what the person just said so that they feel listened to and they hear themselves in some ways talk.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. And which leads me to listen. One of the biggest things is listen. It's so important. A lot of times people are fearful because they feel like they have to go into a sales conversation and they have to do all the talking. And for introverts, it's like, oh my gosh, now I have to go into this conversation and do this song and dance or convince this person. And it's like, no. You go into the conversation, you have your questions, you ask the questions, and you help that, like you said, you help that person kind of do their own course of self-discovery around how we're going to help solve this problem. And you get to do it together. And one of the solutions is probably working with you, right? And then I would say the final thing is to include stories. Like start to think about client stories or stories and things that you've read to really help that other person see themselves go through that process and solve whatever that issue is. We see this all the time with weight loss commercials, right? Like no matter what the actual solution is, the process is all the same. There was this person who was unhappy. They did this and then they got this, right? And so whether it's just the weight loss, they felt better for summer, or they actually helped reverse like some challenges with their health. And so again, being able to create those stories and share those stories when working with other clients. You don't have to share their name, just the experience and what it was like. Maybe even stories about yourself and things like that. And I would also say when you ask the right questions, it really does help people to know like, oh, okay, this person is someone that I probably would want to work with.
So you help them with the process, listening, and that they want to work with you. I have another question. Have you given us the 5?
I think that was the 5. I got a little chatty there.
No, that's great. So the first was be prepared for any what if you can and get the information of how you want the conversation to go and what information you need. Then the second is being on the phone, preferably so that you can stand and walk. So release some of that nervous energy through the walking. You probably will think better. Then it's reformulate what they're saying to help them listen to themselves and help them through the thinking process and solution process. Okay? And go into the conversation focused. And then it was also giving them stories of your clients without giving their names, but giving them stories or about yourself so that they can project themselves in a situation and see themselves with their 5 senses. Mm-hmm. Did I miss anything?
And I would just add, listen, like, don't feel the pressure to go in that you have to do all the talking.
Okay. Not the pressure to have to talk. Mm-hmm. My question now, there are buyers that are in different cycles. Some are just sort of wanting to have more information and just asking the questions. And others are really, they know they want to buy. They're ready to buy. They just don't know which object they want to buy or which service. How do you treat them differently? The one that is out to get information or the one that's just basically has already decided that they want to buy and basically deciding whether to buy it from you?
Yeah. So one of the things is, well, there are a couple things. One is adding some sort of questionnaire or some way that you gather information before you go into the conversation. So again, well-formulated questions to kind of help you gauge where they may be in the buying process, and also just to help you not come into the conversation blind, like you have some information. The other goes back to something I mentioned earlier, is really honoring that buying process, because a lot of our prospects have done their homework, if you will. So like you said, there are some that come in and they've already done their homework. They've already done their background research. They know that they have a problem and they're ready to solve it, that sort of thing. And they're just looking to you to kind of help them decide like which one and how to get started. And so you may ask some questions up front, either in that pre-questionnaire or at the beginning of the call, kind of like, tell me where you are or what questions you may have or what you know about our company or our offerings. So you can kind of get a gauge of where they are in the process, and then honor that process. Because I've been in those situations, and you may have experienced it too as a buyer, where I don't need all the background information. I've already done that, right? I just need you to tell me and answer these few questions, and then I'm ready to buy. And so again, honoring that person and where they are in the process. And you may not have to do a whole lot of answering questions or asking questions to get to know that or help them discover, because they already are there. So you can kind of skip to some of let's talk about where you are, what, like maybe your budget, or, tell me a little bit more about your problem or challenge that you're having, so we can help you decide on what's the right solution, versus someone who's a little bit farther back and they're like, I'm not sure. And so one, you may not close that person in that first conversation. So be okay with that. Really helping them to understand whatever questions that they may have at that stage, whether it's more background information on you or the solutions or your company, and then being prepared to possibly have a follow-up conversation. And if possible, schedule that follow-up conversation at the end of that first conversation. I think sometimes we go into sales conversations with our quote unquote scripts in hand, and we feel like every conversation is treated the same. And that's not the case. We have that so that we have a resource to kind of help us stay focused and, increase our confidence. Cause you're like, okay, I know what, if they say this, I know what I'm going to say. But if someone comes in, they're like, Dr. Katrina, I've listened to the podcast. I've read all the things. I've been all over your website. I've, watched all the videos or whatever. you're like, oh, okay, then you could probably skip some of that because they already know it. And again, honoring that, but then knowing the questions to ask to really help you gauge where they are in the process.
Thank you very much, Nadia. Most interesting. We come to the end of our podcast. Where can people get a hold of you?
Yes, you can visit us on our website, which is thedoyenneagency.com. We also have a sales persona quiz to help you understand more about your persona and maybe some of the blind spots with that, which is discoveryoursalesblindspot.com.
Thank you very much, Nadia.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Excellent Executive Coaching Podcast. You can subscribe to all future podcasts at excellentexecutivecoaching.com. Join us each Wednesday to learn more about the latest trends in leadership techniques and bring your coaching to the next level. To learn more about Dr. Burrus' CEO Mastermind, use the contact form at excellentexecutivecoaching.com.